Are you listening? Damn.
Welcome into the other episode of the Rantings of a Fantasy Football Fanatic. I am your host, Jesse Moeller, aka JMoeller05, and we are diving deep into the Get to the Know series. And this will be the third rendition of the series. We are ideally doing an episode a day, all the way through up to the start of the season. Bringing different people from all walks of life, everybody in fantasy football, whether you're someone who plays the game, whether you're someone who does content, maybe you're strictly a dynasty person, maybe you're strictly redraft, maybe you focus on injuries. We're trying to get perspective from everybody who's involved in dynasty and why they're in it. So I have someone who is actually in a couple leagues with me. That would be Alex, aka SunflowerFF on Twitter. So let me bring them on the screen and say hi to you.
How's it going?
Good. How's your day going?
Pretty good. Just getting started. Slept in a little late today.
Yeah, I finally my kids and my wife are out of town, so I finally get the ability to like wake up on my own time. Usually it's bright and early, cracking down on my daughter we roll, but today got a little free time. So yeah. So why don't you kind of like give us a rundown of what brought you into fantasy football in general? What was the spark or the starting point for you?
So back in high school, I had a buddy, Elijah, actually, who started a 4-man redraft league just to try it out. And after the first year, they expanded to 6, and I was part of that first expansion. And just every day, we didn't have any classes together. We just hang out at lunch and just walk around and talk fantasy football, just for 6 months, you know? And from there, I was hooked. I couldn't put it down. I'm looking for new ways to get involved, and I can't believe it took me more than 10 years to find Dynasty.
Right. It's quite the jump when you take that first step into like Dynasty. You're like, well, what is this? It's a different beast. Like I'm blown away. I'm so hooked. Like, give me more. I think my first year I did like 15 Dynasty leagues, and I was like, all right, this is too much. I need to step back. I'm completely overwhelmed. My wife was like, what are you doing right now? I'm like, I'm in a die. She's like, another? I'm like, yeah, sorry. So with that first expansion, because that's kind of an interesting way to kind of go about a league, right? With a redraft. How did that expansion work for you guys? Going from 4 to 6, was it just you guys add the team? Were there free agents available? How did that go for you?
Oh, well, in that redraft, we just expanded in the off season, so we just hooked into the draft. Yeah. Okay. Then we expanded to, I don't know if we expanded to 8 and then 10, or if we just went from 6 to 10. But now we're a 10-man. So.
Nice. And you said it, and I was talking to you pre-show. It's like you're still in that league, right?
Oh yeah, yep. I'm the commissioner now. Actually, we've made some changes. We've lost a guy, had to replace him. Kicked one guy out, and he came back and won the championship the next year. You know, classic stories.
The ultimate mic drop move. Oh, that's too funny. I'm sure you were like, son of a biscuit. Like, that's not what I want to see. But
I actually was. I looked and I was like, we need to bring. His name's Evan. I was like, we need to bring Evan back into the league, and I was like, watch, he's gonna win the championship. And the dude ran. Jamal Charles carried him to the championship that year. So yeah, I think
Jamal Charles.
You can find out exactly which year that was. Just go looking at his career.
Yeah, it's probably like 2013 range, give or take. It's funny. So my home dynasty league we've been in since 2013. There was the guy who started the league. It was a redraft at the time. He won the first 2 years, then he quit. Literally, like, so we named the trophy after him because he went to college. The trophy is called the Brandon Kramer Trophy. It's because he dominated the 2 years with Peyton Manning, and he just dipped out with that offense. We're like, this guy's a legend. I haven't talked to him in like 8 years, but I was like, yeah, I still know who this dude is. Still lording over the league. So yeah, that was my first introduction to the whole league and stuff. It was like, yeah, I'm absolutely hooked.
Is that still the trophy name?
Yeah. So that's
awesome. His legend lives on.
Yeah, it does. So like this trophy is like a big plate right there. It says the Brandon Kramer Trophy. And then it's got we do little plates where every year it's like 2013, 2014. He has the first 2 years back to back. So I'm like, yeah, this guy just beat the brakes off us those 2 years. I mean, he had the whole Broncos offense both years, and it was just like you couldn't do anything about it. So yeah, it's like, well, all right. And then he left the league, and like everybody's like, whew, we finally got a shot. So with your passion for fantasy football, right? Like, when you transitioned that into Dynasty, did it just fully just encompass everything where you were just nonstop fantasy football all the time? Or were you kind of able to manage your life outside of it along with all the Dynasty you're doing? How did you go about approaching that?
Well, I think the trick to that, for me at least, is that fantasy football is already like incorporated throughout my life. It's like going to the bathroom or getting a cup of coffee. Fantasy football is part of that daily routine. So it just gave me another point of engagement with it, where I was just like, you're digging in the weeds to find new articles to read about any.
Mhm.
So it gave me so instead of having to read the same article reworded for the fifth time about Michael Thomas's ankle injury, I can now just
Mhm.
for Michael Thomas in all of my leagues.
Right. Just like it's interesting the amount of content that's available now. Like you could literally just fill your day completely with fantasy football content and not even come close to everything that there is out there. It's massive. It's compared to like when I started back at like 10 years ago, it feels like a completely different ball game. I feel like I've jumped into a whole new stratosphere of stuff. It's really the Wild West out here, I swear sometimes.
Oh yeah.
So what do you enjoy the most about fantasy football? Like what's the one thing if you distilled it down that you would take away where you're like, this is why I play fantasy football and this is why I love it so much?
I think it's the process. There are so many moving parts to account for there. When you go and you say, is this the best receiver for me to take in round one of this redraft, or should I trade for this running back and spend this second round pick in dynasty? There's so many factors to consider, and no matter how far you zoom out, you still won't get the full picture. So it's about how you slice the pie, and you can slice the pie in any different way and get a different size piece.
Talk about your process in general, like you were referencing. You said you love the dynasty orphans. Let's talk
Yes.
about those a little bit. What appeals to you so much about a dynasty orphan? Like you're like, I'm going to take this broken down ship and I'm going to rebuild it. What's the spark that you're like, you know what? I can do this.
It's kind of like have you ever played Fallout?
A long time ago, but yes, I have played Fallout. Yes, yes.
So they have those mods that are like live a different life, where you load
Mhm.
into the game and you're just some person in the world. And I think it's kind of like that, where I'm taking some randomly, from my perspective, randomly generated like set of circumstances, and now I have to make the most of them. So
Mhm.
instead of going into a startup draft where it's like, okay, these are my targets this year, or the next year, it's like, okay, these are my targets this year. And of course, there's a million different strategies you can do on Dynasty Draft Day. You can trade down, you can trade up, you can, you productive struggle, whatever. I think there's something about entering the world that's already happening around you and trying to make the most of it. And it does circle back to, I think one of the things that sucks me into fantasy football is the trades. I am at heart a haggler, and
Mhm.
I know there's sales jobs out there and stuff, but they don't quite scratch the itch like fantasy football does, and I don't know what it is. So
It's
the
it's it's unique, right? Like
oh
you
yeah.
try to explain it to people who are not as involved, especially like, and this goes more to the dynasty aspect of it for people that are dynasty lifers, where it's just like, yep, trade this player. You try to be player agnostic, right? You're like, I don't care, just flip them for profit, everything like that. But with the orphans as opposed to startups, how do you go about approaching your strategy and tailoring it different than you would say a startup? Like, what's your go-to move when you see an orphan? Like, how do you break them down, and then how do you go about rebuilding them?
It really kind of depends what the main asset that the dynasty has, that team
Mm-hmm.
has. So one of them that I took over had Patrick Mahomes, right? And I was like, wow, that's
Mm-hmm.
a great piece to build around. But that's also a great piece to sell. And
Mm-hmm.
I sold him pretty much immediately. Um, that was, I think I took over that team 2 years ago, and it is now shaping up to be ready to compete. Like the window opens next year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Another one I took was also just terrible. I think it had Jalen Hurts, actually, another high value piece. Usually, what I do, I think, then is I take my high value piece and hopefully it's a quarterback, and I try to get picks for them and then just play the market and feel it out. Um, that one I went and took, it was like, okay, I can either grit my teeth for 2 years or I can make a bunch of trades and go for a win now. And that's what I did this year. Is that team is set up with like Dalvin Cook, Tyreek Hill. So I went and like got these guys who, you look at the clock and you're like, that time's running out, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not up yet. So, and that's one of the interesting things when you take on multiple orphans is you approach it differently. I have one that I took over this year that has, I think it only has like two players that have been in the league for more than 3 years. So I recognize its window isn't going to open next year, but it is definitely set up, assuming that my picks pan out, which is always a little bit of a lottery
Uh-huh.
sometimes.
Yes, it is. Yes, it very much is. But like you're saying with the picks in general, like they're very interesting and they obviously hold the most value just because they're not going to decline no matter what. Where it's like, oh yeah, I get this player. It's like, well, yeah, I have this pick. It's a mystery box, but it'd still be here. It's not going to completely face plant, right? So they're insulated beyond belief, which is what I love about just the rookie picks and why the market is so high on rookie picks. Like we're talking about a few years ago, those rookie picks, people do not view them the same way they do now, and you'll notice this. Particularly you as an orphan rebuilder, I'm sure you see that more than most people, where you've noticed the change in how Dynasty is played.
A little bit. The pick value definitely is an interesting thing to me. Especially, you're right that people have valued the picks more recently, I think, than before.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak to more than like 5 years ago, but
so why don't let's just jump into like you're talking about taking over the new team. What's the allure of it for you in general? Like when you see it, you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to take this over and I'm going to do it. Like why do you go after those orphans? And do you care how like the level they are? Like if it's a bottom basement, like that's just a dog shit one, or you're like, you know what, this one has some pieces. Do you care, or you're just like, just give me that orphan, I'll do it?
I usually go in, what is it, sight unseen. I
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, if you have an orphan, hit me up. Like, I'll take it. I don't care what it looks like. The worse it is, the better. It's a grind, you know. I wanna look at this deteriorating like house, and then at the end I have this mansion. It's like I did that, you know.
Mm-hmm. It's the pride you get from rebuilding it, right? Or you're like, that's right.
Yeah,
I put this
and
together.
all the steps that you have to take, and it's so noodly. You can't just make one move and be like, okay, we're good. It's 10 plus, you know, draft picks, trades, and sometimes multiple trades. Sometimes you buy your wheels back from someone else later, you know.
Mm-hmm. Do you prefer a platform, and do you notice a different evaluation in platforms that you're on? Like if you're playing on say MFL or Sleeper or Fantrax or whatever, right? Like do you notice a difference in how managers evaluate players and picks on each platform?
My favorite is Sleeper, but my experience is a little narrow on a lot of different like you had your what would you call them, like your origin one, like the ESPN, CBS,
Mm-hmm.
Yahoo. I think Sleeper is a big step up in terms of customization as far as scoring goes,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is necessary, especially for like my home league. We have a bunch of unique noodly rules when we still use ESPN, unfortunately, which good platform, fine and whatever, but the Sleeper customization,
It blows it out of the water.
Oh
It's
yeah.
way better. Yeah, it's like I had a post about that like not too long ago where I just posted the mobile apps and the difference. Like, oh, here's the draft board on Sleeper. ESPN doesn't even give you a draft board. And I'm like, dude, like it's just straight up out the gate. Like, you guys are the world's biggest platform. Like, this should not even be a discussion at all. Yeah, it's just it's something I always just harp against. I'm like, why? And I have one league that's stuck on ESPN. They won't get rid of it. I'm like, dude, I can't. I just can't. Just please no more.
It would probably benefit if Sleeper could make like an import thing, so you can import all of your league history. That would definitely get my home redraft league to switch, because that's their big thing, is like our history is here, and it's like, yeah, it's also in our record book, but I get it. There's some stuff we didn't write down. We did lose some history a few years ago when they made that change. Not, I think they went back and added a bunch, but I don't remember.
Yeah, that was an issue with my home league, and I was like, I don't care if we're moving to Sleeper, we'll figure it out. So I had to manually input our history because they let you manually input it. It's just a pain in the butt. You have to go back each year, put the records, so you can put little details. It's not super detailed, but you see how teams did, championships, stuff like that. So I spent like an hour or two when we initially set it up, and I was just like going through on ESPN, tracking all the stuff, writing it down, and I transferred it over. So people actually have that because they were like, I don't want to lose the history. I'm like, listen, I keep track of all this stuff because I'm like the shadow commissioner in a way in this home league, where basically everything runs through me, but I'm not the main commissioner. So they'll just turn to me like, hey, we need to do this. I'm like, all right, but yeah, like I have it on Google Docs. I have all the records like pre-dynasty, then when we shipped to dynasty. So yeah, like I tried my best to make that good for our league, that we're going to a whole new platform where everybody, like, let's be real, people hate change, in particular in leagues, right? Where it's like, what's happening? Yeah, it could be a lot, which, you know, I get it. Change is scary.
So your home league was a redraft league and then became dynasty?
Yes. Yeah.
That's super cool. We became a keeper league
Mhm.
with ours, so
Yeah.
we do cycles, which is kind of interesting. We do like 1 year on, 1 year off, so we have like reset drafts. Um, there's some talks with our rule changes happening soon, but
Nice. I mean, yeah, it's tough to convert a whole league that's keeper to dynasty. Like this took me like 3 or 4 years of being like, hey, by the way, have you guys heard of dynasty? They're like, what is dynasty? I'm like, it's just basically you play the whole year. And like half the league immediately he's like, ooh, what? And then the half the league was like, no, that's stupid. So then we fully just like chipped away, got another person. Then finally everyone's like, all right, we're in. And I was like, yes, thank you. So yeah, we went in 2020. We shifted and just I immersed myself into dynasty with that move. So I was like, well, hey, all right, let's see what this world's all about. Yeah, it was an adventure to say the least.
I know all about that multi-year slog to get rule changes through. I've been first it was keepers, then it was campaigning to add an extra wide receiver slot. I finally got them on board to add an extra flex instead, which was like, you know what, I'll take it because you should probably start a receiver there anyway.
Yep.
But
yeah, we finally got him to move to the third wide receiver this year. Like they were
ooh,
the weirdest
nice.
part is we went to IDP for a bit. They were more comfortable doing IDP than they were doing a third wide receiver. And I was like, because we had defense, and I was like, I can't stand defense kickers. If we're doing dynasty, this is idiotic. Like, let's get them out of here. So they were like, all right, we'll do IDP. And I was like, take it. Like, that works. And then we're finally moving off IDP and now adding a third wide receiver. I was like, yes, finally.
Nice.
So, yeah,
how do those transitions work in Dynasty for you? Like losing the player, basically.
We're giving we give a window. We have every year we have a home meeting where we all meet up at a specific place because we're all relatively close to each other, where we have the winter meetings, we call them. And I'll come with a sheet of potential changes. I'll talk to everyone in the league. Like, all right, what's something you want to change? And I write it down, right? And then I'll come in, I'm like, all right, here's what we got. And I start listing them off. And I'll put the more important ones at top and the ones that are just like less important, whatever, right? And we'll just go through. I'll be like, okay. And I'll lay it out in detail. Like, all right, 3 wide receivers. Let's hear this. Let's hash this out. They're like, why 3 wide receivers? I'm like, because there are so many more startable wide receivers. I'm trying to increase the value because it's a lot of guys who are stuck in the old running back mindset where they significantly overvalue running backs, right? So yeah, it's just a whole process of just trekking along and we're getting there. But I figure just got to keep grinding away at it. There's always 1 or 2 things. I'm like, let's do this. And they're like, no.
Yeah.
Please. But it's the joy of home leagues, right? Like I more love the league just because of the people that are in it, not necessarily the format. Because the format, obviously, certain more formats are fun than other, but interactive leagues far and away are way better. Like you can play in the analyst leagues, they're not that fun because people just aren't active. So it's just like, oh, cool, I'm playing with this famous person, but realistically, they're so busy, they don't have time to make those moves. So it's not as fun. And I think that's the trip for people. They're like, oh, how was it? I was like, nah, it was all right. But my home league's like 10 times better. So yeah, if you have any home league, which yours sounds like it's a pretty good league, I would assume that is one that you're very happy to be in.
Oh yeah.
So what sets you apart from just your traditional fantasy football player? Like if you're like, if I asked you, say like, what could I take away from your knowledge or your ability that stands kind of on its own?
I think I am, unfortunately, about a year or 2 looking ahead of the curve. So I'm watching these trends happen, and it doesn't help me win because I do it now. I'm starting to recognize, for example, this last year, right, where you had 4 quarterbacks who scored in excess of 350 points, and then your number 5 guy, Geno Smith, scored right about 300. And I saw that coming. So this was the first year I've ever been the first guy to take a quarterback, and I took Josh Allen. Good, definitely performed. Actually, I won the championship, so that was great. It was the first time I pumped the brakes a little and was like, okay, the quarterbacks there's something interesting happening here, and then I hit it right this time. So I think that's what I would say is my strength is I'm going to be looking at things and I'm a little bit ahead of the curve, but make sure that I'll be like, do this now, because I'm excited about this new strategy. But You're not going to win this year if you follow that, but you will be ready next year.
Right. So yeah, you're like that's very much a dynasty mindset that transfers over. Like, listen, it might not be the best this year, but 2024, 2025, like we're going to be gangbusters. It's like always 2 steps ahead, and I think that's what I've seen a lot from like just my time creating content. Like I've seen that change significantly, where not as many people were not ahead. Now you have, and it's particularly you'll see this on Twitter all the time, where people are so ageist. It's like, oh, the guy's 26. I'm getting rid of him, and I'm like, all right, hold time out, hold the phone. Like I get it, but like we're still trying to win here too. You have to find a happy medium. Because I did that back in 2020 where I went all young, and I immediately regretted it because my team was like, oh, I have 0 difference makers. Oh yeah, this was not how I envisioned this going. So yeah, there is kind of a happy medium, but being early on the age curve is always a plus. Like it's a good way to look at it.
It was just when I first started redraft, everyone in my league was taking quarterbacks, and I was like, why? These running backs are really good. And so I was taking these running backs. I, of course, bad. I was bad because their quarterbacks were outperforming me by a wide margin. Then you look at the league like 3 years ago, and everyone's taking running backs in the first round. I'm like, huh, that's nice to see. It was the tail end of that trend where the running backs were going. What was that from the Christian McCaffrey, Ezekiel Elliott, like that 2016, 2017.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah.
And now the transition. Yeah. Oh yeah. And the transition is going away from that now. I think we're seeing a lot of talk about like Travis Kelce going in the first round, which makes sense. Wide receiver Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. So I'm looking at it now and I'm thinking, is this the year that I go back to taking a running back in the first round? Do I take Christian McCaffrey? Because there's the wide receivers are. This might be getting a little too in the weeds for where we're going here today, but the wide receivers, I was looking at it, and outside the top, I think 8 or 10, your average point per game difference. No, actually, your average point on the season difference was about 5 points.
Yeah.
What am I doing reaching for anyone in round? I mean, round 1, I get it. You have a guy who's scoring as much as the number 4 quarterback in PPR, Justin Jefferson to Joe Burrow. So I get that, but when you're looking at round 2, unless you're taking, I got a guy in mind right now. Let's take 1 or 2 guys. I think you might be missing out on some potential opportunities there. Playing with the way the market is at the moment, so you can exploit, but you can play the market and the accepted like consensus of how we should be playing if you can pick up on where those little advantages come up in your draft.
Yeah, it's been quite the overcorrection from last year in general. Like, and this is really just redraft, but even in Dynasty, those wide receivers are getting skied to the moon. Like we have Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Drake London. They're all pushing into that second round. London falls a little bit later, like 3rd round. But like these guys are young. They haven't proved it yet, and we're just banking on the talent. So it's interesting to see. And then you have players such as Devontae Adams, the older guys, and they're getting pushed down. Where Cooper Kupp, like he's still by far the best fantasy wide receiver the last 2 years. But people are like, he's old. I'm going to push him down. And it's interesting to see that dynamic. And in redraft, I think it's interesting because you're talking about difference makers, right? You're talking about Kelce, talking about Allen, like Mahomes, these guys that are truly elite. And a couple of years ago, if you would have told me you're taking Kelce and Mahomes in the first 2 rounds, I said, you're dumb. Why are you doing this? But now, like, my mindset has completely changed. I'm like, you know what? I can get on board with that. You're like, it's a difference maker. Those guys are, and like Kelsey's the biggest difference maker of them all, right? Just because the position is. So it's kind of fun to see how consensus shifts and changes. And if you as an individual want to follow along with that, or you kind of want to go the opposite way, like you buy back into those running backs because they're super cheap. Right? So you kind of flip it. And I think that's a fun way to play it because it gives you an advantage. Even if you're wrong, and like we're all going to be wrong at some point. Like, it's just how this game is. There's too much chance. I think it's fun to take those chances if you're willing to do it.
Absolutely. And I know we talked about it a little bit with the gap in the top 4 to the rest of the quarterbacks, but I think this is the year we overcorrect on quarterbacks and we see them start going earlier with it because your projected top 5 guys are going to go earlier, right? But I think we're going to close the gap from that 300 to 350 point range this year, depending on the status of Kyler, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, these guys, Trevor Lawrence, these guys who can either return to form or take a step forward, I think are gonna close that gap. And taking a QB in round 7 or 8 might be an advantage for you in a redraft. Versus last year where I took Josh Allen like round 3 or 4, which was just crazy for me.
But it worked out. But like he was before the injury, he was out of control. Like he was so good. You're just like, oh my gosh. Yeah, we've been in my home league, which has been 1 QB forever. We're going to transition to Superflex 2025. So there's this giant window. But he's valued, like the guy that has Mahomes will not trade him. He's refused to trade him ever since we did the dynasty draft since 2020. And I've been like, dude, give me Mahomes. And he's valuing him like he's a Superflex 101. And I was like, no, I'm not going to give you that. But now we're like transitioning to Superflex. I'm like, I'm never going to get Mahomes from this guy. It's like, well, all right, let's move on to the next guy. It's pretty funny. So for you being involved in dynasty and redraft, what's if someone approached you and they're like, hey, do you have any advice for me? I'm thinking of jumping into fantasy football and I want to give it a shot. Like somebody that doesn't know anything. What advice would you have for that person?
Probably do as much reading as you can. Like just pick up all the little noodly nonsense that you're going to have to pay attention to now. From training camp, who gets hurt, who's a star, and how much does it matter that they're a star in training camp, to someone having a breakout game and then going quiet, like if somebody has a crazy Gabe Davis, perfect example, I think he, has some crazy games, scores well beyond what you would have thought his ceiling would be. Does that mean you keep that cart there, or do you move on from him? I'm not going to give you the answer here, but I think if you do some reading and looking into again all that noodly stuff, you'll figure out how I would recommend playing it, but how you want to play it. Also, that's the other thing. Develop your own style. Read all this stuff. Figure out how everyone else plays. Learn all the noodly stuff, but make sure you have fun with it. Because if you're just following a system, it might get a little old.
Yeah, it's real. When it comes down to it, you have to enjoy what you're doing. Because I've talked to people about this countless times. They're like, hey, do you want to do this? I'm like, do you want to do this? Is this something you want to do? I'll tell you straight up. Like, I'm going to have no problem being blunt and being like, yeah, I think that's a great deal. But are you happy with this deal? Are you too connected to this player? Like, if you don't want to do the deal, you don't have to do a deal. Like, particularly if you're playing in only like 1 or 2 leagues, right? Like, that's a whole different ballgame. Because I'm more a process player, so it's like I'm giving general advice to dynasty and stuff like that. But if it's individual league, you're like, I don't want to trade Travis Kelce. Don't trade him. Like, you don't have to, So when it all comes down to it, I think that's a great call. Just like do what you enjoy, because we're all playing fantasy football because we love it, and it's one of the fun hobbies / games that we all love. So I think that's great advice for anybody.
Oh, it was just perfect example. Follow your heart a little bit. I own Sam Darnold in every dynasty league. I am a Sam Darnold fan. I'm a Sam Darnold believer. I can't point to any stats that are going to prove that he's going to succeed. I can't show you anything out in the world empirically, but I own every share of Sam Darnold that I possibly could.
You're like,
and if I join any, exactly. If I join any orphans, I'm buying Sam Darnold first day.
The nice thing is he costs like nothing, so you can easily attain him and at worst for like a third in Superflex. It's like, yeah, you're like, cool, I'll pay the price to get my guy. I don't mind doing that. As much as I like to be unbiased with players, there are certain players I definitely have a bias. I'll be in a draft and I'm like, man, I'm about to be super over like heavyweight on this one guy. Like, should I draft him again? And I'm like, all right, yeah, like let's go for it. So I try to do thresholds very much because I have to check my own biases. Otherwise, I'm ending at like 75%, like Mark Andrews or something nonsense like that, right? Where it could cripple my whole ROI this year. So yeah, definitely have to check my own biases, all that. But it's nice to have a few guys that are cheap in that situation where like, yeah, like that's my dude no matter what. How long do you plan on playing fantasy football for? Are you going to play until you're like old age or you're 60, like those guys that have the home league that's going on 40, 50 years, kind of like that? Or are you kind of like, what's your kind of end game with fantasy football?
My next of kin is going to get some dynasty leagues that I fully expect them to manage.
Yeah.
If there are too many, I think I'm in 13 dynasty, 15 overall leagues, the baton is getting passed. And if we have to divvy up the work to multiple next of kins, then so be it. But
right, and then you get grandchildren and you're like, guess what you get on your 18th birthday? You get this dynasty league right here. It's like, what is this? You're like, trust me, it's fine. Like, just let me give you the details on it. And yeah, my daughter's 4, right? So I was Hutchinson Brown was doing the like family where it's like you let your kids draft, right? And I was like, is 4 too young? Like, can she draft? And I was like, no, she doesn't have a clue what she's talking about. I was like, we gotta wait a couple of years. But I was like, Hutch, I'll message him. I was like, I will be in this league in a couple of years. It's just she's not old enough. As much as I wanted to put her in, I was like, it'd basically be just me managing the league. I was like, I can't do that. It's just not the same. And then lastly, if you could change one thing about fantasy football, and it could be dynasty redraft or whatever it is, what is that one thing you would change?
I don't know. I think there are so many different ways that people play, from league formats, like, starting roster, bench sizes, rules about trades, trade deadlines. Do you have them or don't? I think there's so many different ways to play that if I ever wanted to change anything about dynasty, I could just make my own league and do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So you basically just kind of run it how you'd want to run it realistically.
Yeah.
Like your own rules and go that. Yeah. What is that ideal dynasty league setting strategy that would be for you?
I off the top of my head, super flex, 3 wide receiver, 2 flex, 12-man, half PPR. That is my ideal like format. I think that should be the standard. I think maybe this is what I'll say. When we write about fantasy football, I think we should write about, and we should say, when people talk about a league, we assume like PPR if they don't explicitly say otherwise. I wish it was half PPR because I think half PPR gives you the right balance between your running backs and your wide receivers. Rewarding points for production is a big thing in my head, at least, that I want to see. So if you get 10 catches for 50 yards or you get 5 catches for 100 yards, I don't think that has equal weight on the game. I don't think that is equal weight production value for your team in the real world. So why are you guys getting rewarded equally?
Yeah, that's kind of the big issue that's been because like everybody's been pushing towards PPR and now there's pushback against it, right? Where you're seeing a lot of leagues are talking about a point per carry, like infiltrating that into it because they want to give them that way to kind of balance out the running back scoring because we kind of overreact, right? So it's we're kind of shifting that way with it. So it'll be like ebb and flow. You'll see, I've seen it too. I'm like, yeah, here it comes. I've seen more and more people like, oh yeah, 0.2 for point per carry. And I've seen that. Like the Warrior Bowl has it, Scott Fish Bowl has it. A few other leagues like are doing it this year. And enough people are in those leagues, it's going to trickle down. Home leagues at that too. Well, you'd be like, you know what we should have next year? Point per carry. And people are going to be like, yeah or no. And so, yeah, I definitely see that coming through.
I am against point per carry personally. But I understand like the adjustment, like let's try it out, let's give it, feel it out. And if the majority of any of the leagues I'm in want to do it, sure, I'm outvoted. Let's do it. I'll play whatever the system says the rules are. But I think you're kind of rewarding nothing,
Mhm.
And
so would you be because you're talking about the 5 catches for 100 yards, would you be a bigger fan of like the big play bonuses? Would that be something that would speak to you more on that?
I think that's an artificial floor for scoring point, or an artificial like requirement to score. Hey, if you get a 50-yard catch, you get +1. It's like, okay, but that guy got a 49-yard catch. So like that doesn't really.
You're trying to find the right way to increase the scoring that still feels right in a way.
Yeah, trying to find the right balance between the point output and the production they did, I think, is really my like philosophy as like commissioner for that home league. They actually did bring up point per carry, and I was like, I don't think so. But I'm a non-voting member of the league, so we have it's a 10-man, so I want there to always be a tiebreaker that isn't me. So whatever they vote, they'll do. I will definitely speak up about it, but they'll vote how they vote.
Yeah, that makes the most sense. Like especially if you're the commissioner, it makes the most sense if you're leaving it up to the league mates to like let them decide, and then you could chime in over the top, be like, no, we're not doing this. Or if it's like, yeah, all right, cool, we'll do it. Like I completely get that. I very much want my league mates to be engaged and enjoying the league with whatever settings they are. So if they want to go that route, as long as it's not off the wall, and I'm pretty wild with stuff I'll do, like I'll try almost anything. So it would have to be ridiculous for me to be like, no, I'm not doing that. It's like we have one league mate who's been pushing tight end premium in our league just because they had Kelsey and now they got rid of him, but they still love the tight end premium, right? And the league is just like, no, we're not doing that. And I'm like, all right, well, or we could go the other way where we remove tight ends and you just make them a flex. And people are like, ooh. So yeah, I'll just like throw stuff out to people every offseason just to get their wheels spinning. And then I see something catches, I'm like, all right, I'll chop that one down. We'll think about it next year, move on from there. But yeah, I like doing that stuff.
Ooh, I do like tight end premium for my ideal league, half PPR tight end premium. I think it raises their floor a little bit, and you get, but like the guys like Kelsey and obviously just exceed the rest.
That's the thing, the elite guys that get the biggest bonus to it. And I think that's the hardest thing people like they struggle to realize. It's like, oh yeah, it's going to help everybody. Technically that's true, but it's going to help the guys. It's particularly if it's catches. Like Kelsey's going to be off the charts. Like he's going to be even more valuable than he is now, which is kind of hard to fathom, right? This guy's just cheat codes as it is. So yeah, I think that's the way to go. Why don't you tell us where people can find you at?
My Twitter is SunflowerFFball. And I am a content creator for the league winners. This year we're doing that the multi-division league, so I'm gonna be writing some weekly content on that league that I am sort of a neutral third party in managing.
You're talking about like you're helping manage like outside of the league, right? Where it's involved, but like we're helping them out. Is that the one I'm talking about?
Yeah. We're like the advisors to the league or whatever. And yeah, that one.
Yeah. I saw that one. I was like, that one seems pretty cool. That should be fun. Like, I bet
it does. I'm excited to write like articles for these guys and like increase and girls if there are any in there. I actually don't know. I did most of my outreach on Twitter through a couple buddies of mine who trying to get like stock traders into fantasy football because I think they're the perfect people. They play a market already. They do all these kinds of research and looking into things, and I'm like, hey, you know what would be perfect for you guys is this fantasy football league. And if you never played fantasy before, that's fine. I'm here to help. And then
that's right where Prue's wheelhouse is. Like that's the whole reason I did that podcast with him. I was like, Prue, you're very good with finance. Like let's talk about dynasty because they really are the same thing. The markets are very similar with how they go, and it's just a 1-for-1 correlation between two. Like I very much agree. I've written articles and mentioned stock trading numerous times because of that exact fact. I'm like, yep. Yeah, it fits them perfectly. They should all do that.
I'm curious to see how the stock traders do versus, everyone else to see. And not that, it's exclusive to like my league is the only one with people who trade stocks, but trying to get an all traders league and see, I'm gonna definitely make sure that they know that their analytical skills are on the line here. They're coming into question with this fantasy league.
You're like, should I be taking advice from you? Like, you sucked in this fantasy football league. Like, why would you be doing my money, right? Exactly, yeah. Hold that against them. That would be pretty funny. It's just like, yeah. But yeah, I wanted to thank you, Alex, for coming on. Like, I very much appreciate it. Like, it was good talking with you. So yeah, I just want to say thank you.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. It was a good time. Hey, if you ever have any free time, want to chat, I'm happy to do another.
All right, sounds good. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Getting to Know series with Sunflower FF. I just want to thank everybody for coming in.
Are you listening? Damn.